Chapter 6. The Lie. In the days and months to follow, all sources could agree on only one thing: Peter Wheeler became the prime suspect because of a single simple statement, a story he told that was perceived by many to be a lie. Wheeler first told the story to his landlady on the night Annie was killed, and not recognizing the trouble it might cause him, he repeated it again during the coroner's inquest. Wheeler's supposed deceit centered on how Annie came to be alone in the house on the night she died. According to Peter, he met Annie in passing earlier that day, at which time she told him there was no need for Tilly Como to come by the house that evening as a local girl named Grace Morini would be staying with her. Wheeler relayed Annie's message to Tilly, who followed the girl's directive and did not spend the night in the Kempton house as previously arranged. During the inquest, Wheeler's story initially passed without comment. He gave his account without hesitation, his brain draining into his mouth at an alarming rate, unchecked by guilt, awareness, or defense counsel. Tilly Como later took the stand and confirmed that Peter had told her there was no need to stay with Annie because the Morini girl would be there. Wheeler's private road to hell was paved with the good intentions of Grace Morini. Grace was a schoolmate of Annie's who lived about a half-mile from the Kempton house. Grace was precocious, some might say exasperating, but she offered the most exacting testimony of the proceedings. Under oath, Grace said she had seen Annie between 3:30 and 4:30 that afternoon on the road between the Brook House and where the Millers lived. So precise was her recall that she recounted their conversation as though reading from a transcript. The Morini girl swore Annie never asked her to stay that evening or any other. Under questioning, Grace was defiant, wielding all the petulance and indignation afforded a teenage girl accused of something she did not do. Morini emphatically told the court she was not in the habit of stopping with Annie in the evenings and that Annie made no mention of needing a companion that night. Asked to clarify one last time, Grace claimed Annie had no conversation with her about it and that Wheeler was mistaken. The packed hall fell silent. As if mounted in a single head, all eyes turned to Wheeler. Whispers eddied throughout the hall, swelling to howls of undignified Wheeler. Whispers eddied throughout the hall, swelling to howls of undignified pother as the news sunk in. The realization whipped through the academy like a cut power line. In an instant, every man, woman, and child in Bear River leapt to the same damning conclusion: Wheeler had lied to get Annie alone that night. Within seconds, the tenor of the inquest changed from somber inquiry to vengeful wrath. Several men in the crowd had to be restrained as they lunged for Peter Wheeler, who sat bewildered but mercifully sequestered with the other witnesses. He seemed genuinely unaware of the shift in winds that enveloped him, absorbing the abuse like a tree in a storm. To Peter, the din was unintelligible, strange yet familiar, like a word repeated endlessly until its syllables lost all meaning. That word was his name, hissed time and again in rage. Although lost on Wheeler, the emotional fluctuation was palpable to all others assembled. Standing at the back of the hall, the St. John Daily Record correspondent noted that in the blink of an eye, every incensed resident mentally appointed himself or herself as duty-bound to do all in their power to run the perpetrator to earth. Lovett, calling for calm, slowly harnessed the room back to order. Fearing violence, he suspended the inquest for the day, declaring that testimony would resume the next morning. The town constables were called in, and as the crowd was forcibly dispersed, accusations continued to fly. Based solely on the peevish word of a confused teen, Wheeler had gone from cooperative eyewitness to ruthless murderer. The press gaggle hovering on the fringes of the inquest were quick to turn the misunderstanding into conclusive evidence of guilt. The Morning Chronicle was first out of the gate, announcing that suspicion now rests solely upon Wheeler and with good circumstantial evidence to back it. The facts are these: Wheeler prevented Tilly Como from going to Kempton's. The Digby Weekly Courier also claimed Wheeler had prevented his landlady from staying with Annie as part of his nefarious plan. Although Peter was not yet charged with any crime and was in no way behaving in a guilty manner, the Courier held forth on his character and culpability ad hominem. Wheeler has kept up his bold front through all the investigation. If he is guilty, as certainly is very probable, he is a remarkably cool and an audacious villain. Wheeler's inattention in the witness stock, born of a clear conscience, was now being posited as proof of his cold-blooded nature. The papers were not alone in their hasty assessment of Wheeler. Detective Nicholas Power was newly arrived in Bear River and was less than 1 hour into his investigation when he held an impromptu press conference on the academy steps. According to the Courier, Detective Power said outside that he had no doubt himself that Wheeler was guilty. If experience had taught Power anything, it was to follow the path of least resistance. Gaining a conviction, even a wrongful conviction, was far easier if the victimized community were already convinced of the accused man's guilt. What no one, Lovett, Power, the jurors, or the media, was willing to consider was the possibility Wheeler was telling the truth. The lone contingency no one entertained was that the lie had been Annie's, not Peter's. Before her body was even cold, Annie Kempton had been lionized, even canonized, by the townsfolk and in the press. Deemed innocent in excelsis and virtuous beyond measure, Annie had become purity personified. In death, she was perfect, she was faultless, she was divine. In reality, Annie Kempton was a teenage girl, possessed of the same angels and demons as every other pubescent lass of the era, or indeed, any era. Just shy of her 15th birthday and well developed for her age, Annie likely resented being saddled with a nightly babysitter as she blossomed into womanhood. She had finally caught the fancy of a boy but was surrounded on all sides, and at all times, by parents, siblings, and the prying eyes of the town busybodies. Yoked with the burden of managing a household in her mother's absence, Annie may have told a harmless fib in order to gain a moment's peace. Wanting her first taste of privacy did not make her rebellious or wanton, it made her a typical teen. Yet the idea that events had played out as Wheeler claimed, that the deception had originated with Annie, was summarily dismissed. By naively repeating what he had been told, Wheeler was not simply a pawn or gullible dupe. He was now a sadistic killer,